Within 2 months, Jaworski's demand for the tapes had reached the Supreme Court.
Well, it says equal justice under law, so we ought to win, Phil.
When the court met to hear the case of the United States of America versus Richard Nixon, Leon Jaworski spoke first.
This nation's constitutional form of government is in serious jeopardy. If the president is to say that the Constitution means what he says it does, and that there is no one, not even the Supreme Court, to tell him otherwise.
Nixon's lawyer, James St. Clair, warned the court against encroaching on the unique powers of the chief executive.
I say the president should decide as a political matter what should be made available. If the court has no right to determine what the executive will offer in evidence.
In a ruling that bears on the limits of presidential power, the Supreme Court said today that President Nixon must surrender more Watergate tapes. 64 tapes sought by the special prosecutor for the Watergate cover-up trial were ordered turned over to Judge Sirica to determine what evidence in them is relevant. The decision was unanimous, 8 justices in concurrence.
Now surely the fatal evidence was within Jaworski's grasp.
I think the president realized its finality and at the same time asked whether or not there was any opportunity to either survive it or to put a twist on it that would preserve his incumbency, of course. But there wasn't anything...
The president had only a few days before the courts, the special prosecutor and the Congress would hear the tape with the conclusive evidence. He tried to use this time to his advantage.
I got a call from Al Haig, who was President Nixon's chief of staff, asking if he could come over and meet with me.
I asked to see him alone. But when I got there, Bob Hartman, his pseudo-chief of staff at the time, was sitting there with him.
He came in, and obviously he was a little annoyed that there was somebody else there, and he started humming and hawing.
I held back a little, but I did tell the vice president he should prepare himself, that there was a new tape.
Al Haig left my office that morning of August 1st, went back to the White House, and then subsequently, right after lunch, he called and asked if he could have a private meeting with me.
Haig handed the vice president a list of the options that were open to Nixon.
He could resign, he could step aside under the 25th Amendment, one or two others, including the possibility of him resigning in return for me as president granting him a pardon.
Vice President asked me about the pardon authority of the president.
After that meeting, I met with Bob Hartman, and Bob was always a person who was skeptical and cynical.
I said you should have grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and the seat of the pants and kicked his ass out of this office. And then you should have held a press conference and told the world why you did it.
Late that night, I got a call from the vice president telling me that our discussion on those, quote, options was a non-discussion. There was to be nothing done, and that he was to have no position on it. Well, I'm not dumb. I knew what had happened. He had shared that information with Hartman.
No explicit deal for a pardon was necessary. A tentative approach had been made, and the vice president didn't reject it. Haig had other urgent business. The smoking gun tape was about to be released to the court, and he had to alert the Republicans who were still supporting Nixon.
Above all was the Wiggins of California, who had fought so vigorously and courageously for the president. And I told the president I felt it was imperative that we tell him what was in this tape so that he not commit political suicide.